Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India News Hour, India's voice to the world. I'm Mark Lynn. Namaskar. Coming up in the next hour. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi to attend the G7 Outreach Summit in Italy. AI, energy, Africa and the Mediterranean are on the agenda. The Prime Minister is to hold bilateral talks with the French President Macron, the UK Prime Minister Sunak and the Ukrainian President Zelenskyy. G7 leaders converge in Italy for the G7 summit. It opens with a loan deal worth $50 billion to Ukraine. Zelenskyy hails the 10-year defense pact with President Biden as a bridge to NATO membership. Ukrainian Defense Minister Rustem Umerov joins NATO defense ministers in Brussels, says long-term necessity of institutional changes and current urgent needs should be addressed. Germany to begin their quest for a first major title as their Euro 2024 campaign kicks off against Scotland. With an aim to address critical issues affecting the global south, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi touched down at the Brindisi airport in Apulia in Italy on June 14. India, represented by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, is participating as an outreach country to discuss global south concerns and bilateral cooperation. It will be an opportunity to bring greater synergy between the outcomes of the G20 summit, which was held under India's presidency last, and this is Prime Minister Narendra Modi's first foreign trip since he has taken oath as India's Prime Minister for a third term. And this is the 7th time that Italy has hosted the G7. Here's an exclusive report from DD India correspondent Amritpal Singh, who's on the ground.
India is not a member of the G7 but is invited as a partner country. This is the 11th time that India has been invited. The Prime Minister's attendance will be the 5th consecutive attendance in his first overseas visit after assuming office during his third term. The Prime Minister is expected to address an outreach session of the G7 summit where he could touch upon issues related to artificial intelligence, cooperation in the Mediterranean and with the African continent, as also energy security. The Prime Minister could raise the issue of counter-terrorism in his address. The Prime Minister shall also be holding bilateral meetings with his counterparts, both from the G7 countries as well as the G7 partner countries. There are 12 partner countries that have been invited by Prime Minister Meloni for the Italy summit of G7. Prime Minister, during its meetings, bilateral meetings with his counterparts, especially with the Italian Prime Minister, would like to review the entire gamut of the relationship, be it in the sectors of defense, IT, pharmaceuticals, people-to-people contact, or even textiles and pharmaceuticals. He will also meet with British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Interestingly, he shall be holding a bilateral meeting with President Zelenskyy of Ukraine, who has been invited by Giorgia Meloni. Prime Minister Meloni has been stressing that G7 must come together to deal with the conflict of Russia-Ukraine, which is dominating the agenda here at the G7 summit. Prime Minister Modi could once again reiterate the Indian position that the solution to the conflict can only be found through dialogue and diplomacy and not through military victory. He shall also meet with the French President Emmanuel Macron, as also he could meet his counterparts from the other G7 partner countries. With cameraman Shilinder Chauhan, this is Amritpal Singh for DD India in Apulia, Italy.
Well, the Group of Seven summit started its concluding day of talks on Friday with migration, China and artificial intelligence at the top of its agenda. The G7 leaders gathered for a round table on migration with Italy's Meloni, pushing Europe to help her curb illegal flows from Africa. The leaders are also expected to discuss China's excess industrial capacity and its support for Russia. The annual summit will also see a historic appearance by Pope Francis to discuss artificial intelligence. The Pope will be joined by 10 other heads of state and government, including Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And Giles Gibson now joins us from Bari in Italy with more on this. Giles, the Pope and AI, one didn't realize, that this was a topic that the Vatican is weighing in on. Can you put that into context for us? Giles, can you hear me? Giles, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay.
Sorry, I was just having some problems hearing you. Yes,
okay,
I can.
Right. So I was saying that the Pope and AI, one didn't realize that this was a topic that the Vatican was weighing in as well on. Could you put that into context for us?
Apologies, you cut out again. I'm afraid I couldn't hear the question.
Oh, okay. We'll get back to you, Giles, when we correct that. So moving on then, NATO defense ministers are meeting in Brussels as day two begins of the summit, the ministers of NATO member states have gathered on Thursday to discuss their support for Ukraine. And Ukrainian Defense Minister Rustem Umerov in a statement said that urgent needs for more supplies and weapons of air defense and ammunition for Ukraine will be discussed at this meeting. Furthermore, the foreign ministers will also discuss long-term financial pledges for Ukraine.
We appreciate for your personal leadership, for the NATO partners for our urgent support, and I look forward to discuss with you long-term cooperation models. And I think it will be our last meeting before the Washington summit, which we look forward to have soon on the leadership level, and we will be, of course, touching all the urgent needs and long-term necessity in the institutional changes that is being proposed.
NATO defense ministers slammed Russia for its rhetoric on nuclear weapons. They said that the alliance also has nuclear arsenal, but it doesn't engage in rhetoric.
Russia will not change. Russia's threat is increasing, and when we look also how much Russia is investing at the moment to defense, this year close to 9% of the GDP, then we all understand that when we put in comparison our 2% in NATO or 3.5% in Baltic states and Poland, then still we need to invest more.
I think that the nuclear rhetoric that we're hearing from the Kremlin is just that, rhetoric. At the same time, nuclear weapons is serious, and you shouldn't use them in this way, I think. We have nuclear capabilities as NATO. We take that very seriously. That's why we discuss it, review it, talk about it, check if everything in place.
NATO Secretary General is urging members of the military alliance to provide Ukraine with a guaranteed annual aid package. This comes as defense ministers are holding 2 days of meetings as part of the NATO-Ukraine Council. Denslow William reports from Brussels.
Speaking at a press conference at NATO headquarters here in Brussels, Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General for NATO, said that an annual $40 billion or so fund for Ukrainian aid on an annual basis would provide Kyiv with predictability and also would provide members with a degree more accountability as well. He said that some member states in the past had promised funding but had struggled to deliver. One prominent example is when an aid package of roughly $61 billion was held up in the US Congress for a number of months. Jens Stoltenberg says such delays have real impacts for Ukraine on the battlefield in their fight against Russia. He also says that an annual guaranteed fee would also send a very clear message to Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin that NATO's allies and Ukraine are willing to stay in the fight for as long as it takes, and they will win a war of attrition. When it comes to paying for this roughly $40 billion annual fund, well, Stoltenberg says that it will be taken into account of a country's gross domestic product, its GDP. He said that because the US is the largest country economically, it would foot around 50% of the bill. One significant hurdle that appears to be overcome by NATO Secretary General this week. He was in Budapest in the Hungarian capital. He met Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who has been incredibly sceptical of assistance for Ukraine going forward. Stoltenberg says, however, that while Viktor Orban and Hungary will not participate in this annual funding package, it will, however, not use its power of a veto on this topic. Jens Stoltenberg says there's still much work to be done when it comes to securing commitments from NATO allies, but he is hoping to commit to these long-term goals for Ukraine as we head closer to a major NATO summit scheduled in Washington, D.C. in July. William Denslow in Brussels reporting for DD India.
And let's go back to Giles Gibson, who is reporting from Bari in Italy about the G7 summit. Well, sorry, Giles, we are going across live once again to visuals of a meeting that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is having with the President of France, Emmanuel Macron. The India-French strategic partnership is the foundation of this relationship, which has many multifaceted aspects. It has evolved into several aspects, and it spans diverse areas of cooperation. Significant, has been the relationship in the area of defense cooperation. We do know that the Rafale deal was among the latest of those deals that have taken place, but there have been Scorpion-class submarines, joint exercises. Then there is the NATO Plus outreach. There's economic cooperation as well, France being a significant and important member of the EU. They look to increase trade relations with India, which is not only a large market but the fastest growing economy in the world currently. And of course, both countries have significant similarities and convergences on climate change, as we do remember from the Paris Agreement, and then after that, the International Solar Alliance, which was adopted. So this is a strong relationship. President Macron has been the chief guest at India's Republic Day, and also Prime Minister Modi was the chief guest at the Bastille Day in France. There are basically three pillars to this relationship: mutual respect, which is non-interference actually in the internal matters of any of either country, and there is strategic autonomy, which is also similar to mutual respect. Yes. Amritpal Singh is at the G7 summit, and he joins us now. Amrit, so the meeting that we are looking at right now is between Prime Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the French President Emmanuel Macron. Put it into context for us.
Well, this meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Macron of France was the first bilateral of the day that took place a short while back. The two sides reviewed the entire gamut of the Indo-French relations as even Emmanuel Macron goes into elections in France. The two sides would want to have a continuity in the relationship. So and also the bilateral aspect was discussed, and also the current global crisis that's prevailing and is dominating the agenda here at the Italy summit of the G7, the Ukraine-Russia conflict. That also came up during talks where Prime Minister is understood to have conveyed to President Macron and through him to the rest of the Western Bloc that India favors a solution to the problem through dialogue and diplomacy rather than through any kind of military means or military victory, because India sees that as a counterproductive approach. The two sides also, talked about how to take the French investments into India to the next level and create a framework where more and more French companies can not just invest in India but come and partner with Indian companies to make in India.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much, Amritpal Singh. So that meeting has taken place, the first of the bilateral meetings of the Indian Prime Minister with the French President Emmanuel Macron. Let's return to Giles Gibson, who's giving us an overview of the entire G7 summit as well. Giles, we were talking earlier about artificial intelligence and the Pope's intervention there. The Vatican and artificial intelligence, put that into context for us.
Yeah, they're slightly strange bedfellows, aren't they? The ancient Catholic Church and the Vatican and artificial intelligence, one of the most cutting-edge technologies in the world that experts say is really set to completely transform our lives. But actually, the Vatican has been putting a huge amount of work into producing research and documents around the ethics of artificial intelligence, and that's what we're expecting Pope Francis to focus on when he gives a speech and address to the G7 leaders in this historic moment, because we've never seen a Pope before taking part in a G7 summit. The Pontiff has actually had a pretty busy day, because in the morning back in the Vatican he's been hosting comedians from around the world, including Whoopi Goldberg and late night TV hosts from the US, sort of getting together this large amount of comedians from around the world at the Vatican, saying that they are able to kind of bring people together during this time of global crises. So now that that has wrapped up, Pope Francis is on his way down south to take part in the G7 summit.
Let's look at some of the other issues being raised at the G7. There is the issue of nuclear power, climate change, finance especially, given the fact that the world is going through some economic crises. How do all these fit in? Have they, the G7 usually meets in smaller groups and consults, and at the summit they sort of come to some big decisions. On these subjects, what are we expecting?
Yeah, the structure of a G7 presidency that Italy has inherited this year is that you have the individual ministerial meetings. So the trade ministers or the finance ministers, for example, which we saw recently, they get together to have kind of in-depth discussions on their areas of expertise. And then it's really the summit that is the central part of this, where you are looking to get the leaders to sign off on different things when it comes to climate change goals or global taxation, all sorts of things. And the final joint statement could run to dozens of pages with the different pledges that they will agree on. But really the key, I guess, as someone like me, a journalist reporting on these G7 summits, is to go through those large, long statements and pick out the really important details, such as that $50 billion loan that the G7 leaders have now reached a political agreement over in terms of handing that money over to the Ukrainians by the end of this year.
Giles, coming to that, You know, I mean, one asks questions about how feasible that actually is, since the money is Russian. I mean, is it really possible? The money is supposedly frozen. That means it's seized, unfrozen, and then given to Ukraine. You know, these are questions that would come up. After all, the money doesn't belong to the people who are giving it out.
Yeah, I think it's important to stress here that what the G7 are going to do is not actually take frozen Russian assets and simply just hand them over to the Ukrainians. What they're going to do is issue a $50 billion loan. That loan issued largely by the US, although the Europeans are looking at sort of financing a chunk of that loan. And then the interest on that loan will be paid for by the interest on more than $300 billion of frozen Russian assets that are generated every single year. So that is the overall structure of this agreement. Although the G7 have admitted that they just have a kind of overarching political agreement at this stage, they still need to spend the next few weeks or so working out the exact technical details, because of course this agreement crosses all sorts of different legal jurisdictions.
Also, Giles, since you know, there are many countries going to the polls this year, does that, you know, affect the communique in you know, in its totality, in its strength, given the fact that, you know, some of the governments are basically lame duck in a sense?
That's very right. You see a lot of political analysts looking at some of the pledges in the joint statements or the meetings on the sidelines of this summit, and they will legitimately ask the question, you know, if Joe Biden, as the US president, is signing this 10-year agreement with Ukraine, the 10-year security agreement, if he doesn't get back into office, if he doesn't stay in the White House and Donald Trump comes in, there are question marks about how that agreement would actually survive through a second Trump presidency. And yes, there are other questions around other leaders, including Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister, who is far behind the opposition Labour Party in the polls. You also have the French President Emmanuel Macron, who's called snap general elections. So a lot of these leaders coming into this summit with a pretty weak domestic situation back home.
So a final question, Giles, what is expected from this communique later?
Well, look, the central question of this summit has in many ways already been solved. We have that political agreement from the G7 to give that $50 billion loan to Ukraine using the
Giles, I'm cutting in here because we are showing live visuals again, or visuals that are coming in from Italy, of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi meeting with the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak on the sidelines of the G7 summit. And hopefully we'll be able to get some audio in, but the relationship, of course, between India and the UK is a time-tested one and dates back to many, many years. Okay, we are joined by Amritpal Singh, who is on the phone line, who is going to put this into context for us. Amrit, so in the Prime Minister is meeting the British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. Put this into context for us.
The Prime Minister, this was the second bilateral of the day. Just after he met President Macron, he met with the British Prime Minister. Again, this was essentially to review the bilateral relationship, though it was a short meeting. But the two sides, did take a look at the bilateral aspects, but also did speak about what is transpiring here at the G7, where India has, as conveyed to President Macron, Prime Minister, conveyed to the British Prime Minister the Indian approach of a pacifist approach to the conflict and finding solutions within that framework rather than through military victory. This is a point that Prime Minister is expected to stress upon to all the Western Bloc leaders that he meets today. So that is what transpired at the meeting between the two Prime Ministers, Mark.
Also, the two countries have a vision, I think, a 2030 vision, a roadmap. Also, they're looking to improve trade ties. These things don't really come into focus when you have a brief meeting like this, is it?
These things are just touched upon, Mark, because you cannot go into details in just a 20-minute meeting, and this is rather a one-on-one meeting that the Prime Minister is having with the Western leaders. The details of a proper review and course correction, etc., takes place when you generally have your whole delegations meeting with concerned suggesting the course correction, etc. But yes, these things are touched upon. That this is the areas that we need to work upon. But as Giles was saying, the British Prime Minister goes into polls. So this is, this opportunity is an opportunity primarily for the Prime Minister to convey the Indian stand to the Western leaders, especially given that it is their summit. It's a summit of the G7. India is an invitee country or a partner country, but the Prime Minister would put across the point of view of India and also of the Global South at the outreach session. But in these one-on-one meetings, there is a more personal aspect to it, where the Prime Minister conveys the Indian position to respective heads of state or government of the Western Bloc countries. Mark.
So India is, as we are reporting, speaking largely about issues of the Global South. And this, I mean, the G7 was considered to be, the high table or the group of the rich industrialized countries. And India, of course, is acting as the bridge between the two, and under the presidency of India and the G20 that did take place, that bridge was very visible. To what extent are we seeing India perform this role in the outreach as well here at the G7?
Mark, you rightly said that India is trying to be a bridge between the developed world, how the developed world looks at solving the crisis and the challenges being faced by the world today, and the needs and aspirations of the Global South bloc. Because India has assumed over a period of time, the undeclared leadership of the Global South. So if you look at the outreach countries or the partner countries or invitee countries invited at this conference, they are from, there are 12 countries in total, 5 organizations. They are from the Global South. I mean, you have representation from South America, you have representation from the African continent, you have India from Asia, you have the Arab League here. So clearly, and then of course you have the G7 countries, which are the most powerful, the most rich, the most industrialized economies of the world. So the approach towards challenges is what differs. For example, the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Their narrative and their perspective on it is primarily how they can be, Russia can be countered militarily, and but the global concerns are about the after effects of the ongoing conflict and the longer it drags, the effects of it are too much for the weaker economies to bear. Say about global supply chain disruptions, the food insecurity, energy insecurity. Right.
We'll wait for the Prime Minister's intervention at that point in time. We leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much, Amrit Pal Singh, for putting that into context for us. Now, Reform UK has overtaken. In fact, we are going to give you more. Let's look at coming up. Reform UK overtakes Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's Conservatives in an opinion poll. That's coming up. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump has returned to Capitol Hill to meet Republicans in his first visit since the riot by supporters of his at the Congress 3 years ago.
We just don't bring you the news as it unfolds. We get to the heart of the matter. We don't just present facts, we demystify complex social, political and economic events.
We break stories that shape the world's present and future because you deserve the truth.
I am Tanvi Taneja from New Delhi.
I'm Ollie Barrett from London.
I'm Nick Harper from Washington, D.C.
Join us on DD India Global Monday to Friday at these times.
You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Mark Lynn. Now, the US President Joe Biden and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, they signed a 10-year bilateral security agreement on Thursday, which is aimed at bolstering Ukraine's defense against Russia's attack. The deal, signed on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Italy, aims to commit future US administrations to support Ukraine. The US-Ukraine security deal is a framework for a long-term effort to help develop Ukraine's outdated armed forces and also to serve as a step towards Ukraine's eventual NATO membership.
President Zelenskyy and I have just now signed that agreement between the United States and Ukraine. Our goal is to strengthen Ukraine's credible defense and deterrence capabilities for the long term. The United States is going to help ensure that Ukraine can do both, not by sending American troops to fight in Ukraine, but by providing weapons and ammunition, expanding intelligence sharing, continuing to train brave Ukrainian troops at bases in Europe and the United States, enhancing interoperability between our militaries in line with NATO standards, investing in Ukraine's defense industrial base, so in time, they can supply their own weapons and munitions.
The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy called the agreement historic, and he says that it is a bridge towards Ukraine's eventual NATO membership.
It's a truly historic day, and we have signed the strongest agreement between Ukraine and the US since our independence. And this is something that will not only provide security, but also new good jobs for Ukrainians and Americans. The issue of NATO is covered through the text of the agreement. It states that America supports Ukraine's future membership in NATO and recognizes that our security agreement is a bridge to Ukraine's membership in NATO.
Moscow, which has not been invited in the upcoming international conference in Ukraine, has called the gathering futile. The June 15 to 16 meeting in Switzerland is Kiev's perpetual attempt to reaffirm support against Russia and also to court friends, as Russia has denounced the meeting and has said that the countries had been pushed to choose sides. The US Vice President Kamala Harris, the French President Emmanuel Macron, and the leaders of Germany, Italy, Britain, Canada, and Japan are among those who are going to be attending, whereas China has decided not to participate in the meeting as Ukraine's friend. China, along with Brazil, is pushing a separate peace plan for Ukraine that calls for the participation of both the warring parties. Moscow has previously voiced its support for China's efforts to end the conflict. Hezbollah launched rockets and weaponized drones at 9 Israeli military sites in a coordinated attack on Thursday as the two sides ramped up hostilities on Lebanon's southern border. Flames were seen rising from northern Israel as rescue teams battled the flames. 2 people were injured by shrapnel, according to the Israeli National Ambulance Service. In Lebanon, 1 woman was killed and dozens were injured after a strike on a building during early hours on Friday. The Israeli military said that it's looking into it. Upset by the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas, the famous Latin American music sensation Residente has released his latest song, Bajo Los Escombros, in collaboration with artists from across the globe. The rapper who also stars in the film In the Summers, said that he chose to express his grief through the music. News from the UK now. Well, the Reform UK party has overtaken Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's Conservatives in an opinion poll ahead of Britain's election on July 4. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has declared that his party, the opposition to Labour, after an opinion poll showed that it had overtaken the Conservatives for the first time. The survey, which involved 2,211 participants and was carried out from June 12 to 13, it revealed that Reform UK had garnered 19% support, a 2% increase from their previous standing, while the Conservatives remained unchanged at 18%.
What I will do, if you give me the honour of being your Member of Parliament, I will stand up and fight for people. I will stand up and fight for small businesses against the regulators. I will stand up and fight for people to get their rights. I will stand up and fight to make sure that schools are not poisoning the minds of your children.
The UK's opposition Labour Party has set out its manifesto ahead of the July 4 general election. The governing Conservatives accuse Labour of setting a tax trap. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's Conservatives unveiled their manifesto on Tuesday. DD India's Ollie Barrett compares the two.
There are certainly differences between the manifestos of the two major parties. The Labour Party acknowledges that it is going to put up taxes in some areas, for example, extending windfall taxes on oil and gas companies' profits to pay for some of its spending pledges. The Conservatives, in their manifesto, did announce a cut to the national insurance earnings tax, and they accuse Labour of considering and planning to potentially put up taxes if they get into government. That is a characterisation that the Labour Party would deny, but there is certainly a difference between the two parties on taxation policy. When it comes to migration, both parties are pledging to bring down net migration, but in different ways. The Labour Party says that it would scrap the government's planned Rwanda migration scheme. The Conservatives say that they would get planes to Rwanda up into the air after July the 4th with migrants on them to pursue their asylum claims in Rwanda and not in the UK. There are other areas of difference as well, but there are quite a lot of ways in which the parties, according to the polling, the electorate feel are actually quite similar and are playing from the centrist position when it comes to this election. All of the polling suggests that the Labour Party are well set to potentially win a large majority on July the 4th, but the Conservatives insist that the fight is still on. Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister, has the opportunity to look like a leader on the international stage as the G7 summit continues in Italy. The downside for him is that it means for a couple of days he's away from the UK campaign trail. Ollie Barrett in London, reporting for DD India.
The former US President Donald Trump has returned to Capitol Hill to meet Republicans in his first visit since the riot took place at Congress 3 years ago. The former President Trump met the Republican lawmakers to build unity ahead of the November 5 election. Republicans hope to see Trump defeat Biden, extend their current razor-thin 218 to 213 majority in the House, and take control of the Senate that Democrats currently lead 51 to 49. An Indian Air Force special aircraft carrying the mortal remains of 45 nationals who lost their lives in a tragic fire incident in Kuwait arrived in the southern Indian city of Kochi on Friday. The aircraft carrying mortal remains of the deceased first landed at Kochi, as most of the victims are from Kerala, before proceeding then to Delhi for the victims from the northern states. India's Minister of State for Tourism, Suresh Gopi, and Kerala Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan were among those who were present at the airport. And India's Minister of State for External Affairs, Kirti Vardhan Singh, has thanked the Kuwaiti government for taking this incident very seriously and completed the procedure of identification so that the mortal remains could be brought back to India.
We reached Kuwait and the Honorable Prime Minister had already spoken to the authorities there, to the Foreign Minister there and to His Highness the Emir there. And I would like to say my thanks to the authorities that they did all possible, they took all possible measures and they really fully cooperated in having all the paperwork completed, the identification done in such a short time, because normally this could have taken a week or at least 10 days. But on Prime Minister's insistence, the authorities were very quick about it. They immediately undertook the task of completing the formalities, and we managed to bring back the bodies here as soon as possible.
In fact, the Minister of State, MEA, had also said that the government of Kuwait assured Indians that the paperwork regarding the insurance and the compensation will be done as quickly as possible.
Kuwaiti government is taking this incident very seriously and they're taking all possible steps. They're making inquiries as to how it happened so that this kind of a tragic incident is never repeated again. And they assured us that they will take all possible steps. They have also assured us that all the paperwork regarding the insurance that is to be paid to the families, the compensation, will be done as immediately as possible. And His Highness has also, from his part, also provided a compensation to the families of the victims who have perished in this tragic incident.
And Jessica Taneja now joins us with more on this story. She's joining us from the newsroom. Jessica, you know, put into context for us what the families must be going through. After all, people go abroad in the hope of a better life and opportunities, and they send money back. The remittances are important. And here we have this incident of people, you know, having to deal with these sort of unfortunate circumstances. Jessica, can you hear me?
Yes, Mark.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Right, these are unfortunate circumstances, and you've seen, you know, if you hear from the families of the victims, it certainly, you know, is sad, and one would feel remorse after hearing the kind of stories that have emerged from Kerala specifically. You know, there were migrant workers working in those companies for more than 30 years. One account says that one of the workers was going to come back and in fact quit his job and be with the family. He had already come back for 2 months, spending time there, but returned after the company had called him back. And similarly, more stories of the victims that we're getting to know now, where one of them was going to come back and celebrate the new house, the new house that was set up, and possibly have a housewarming party with family and friends. Another engineer was coming back to celebrate with family, and of course a wedding that he was due to attend. So really sad, details that have emerged from what we're witnessing. More than 40 Indians have lost their lives in this particular incident. Now, the building they were in, of course, the report suggests was a crowded building and often lacked compliances and violated various norms, and perhaps not keeping in line with the compliances that were put in place in the first instance. We've heard from a lot of reports so far, Mark, but the immigrants didn't only include Indians. There were people from Nepal, there were people from Pakistan, even Egypt and the Philippines. So totally a sad day for them and their families. And while 30% of Indian workforce is actually working in the Gulf countries, it is a matter of concern both for India and the countries they're currently stationed in.
We leave it there. Thank you very much, Jessica Taneja, for giving us more inputs about this story. Still to come here on DD India News Hour. Amid devastating landslides in Papua New Guinea's Enga province, relief assistance from India reaches the island nation on Friday. You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Mark Lynn. Let's get your recap of the main stories. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is at the G7. He's attending the Outreach Summit in Italy. AI, energy, Africa and the Mediterranean are on the agenda. The Prime Minister has held talks with the French President Emmanuel Macron and the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. He's scheduled to meet the Ukrainian President Zelenskyy as well. Germany to begin their quest for a first major title as their Euro 2024 campaign kicks off against Scotland. Now, amid a devastating landslide in Papua New Guinea's Enga province, relief assistance from India has reached the island nation on Friday. US dollars 1 million aid was received by Papua New Guinea's by the officials there, including the Foreign Minister Justin Tachenko, the Defence Minister Dr. Billy Joseph, the Secretary, and India's High Commissioner in Papua New Guinea handed over the material to the Foreign Minister Tachenko. And he also thanked the Indian counterparts, that is, he thanked his Indian counterpart, Dr. S. Jaishankar, for this timely help. The Indian Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar visited the India-Pakistan international border on Thursday near Jaisalmer, and this is to boost the morale of the Border Security Force troops. He offered prayers at the famous Tanotrai Mata temple located near the border. The Vice President Dhankar paid tribute to the martyrs at the Vijay Stamp located in the temple premises. Following the temple visit, the Vice President was given a guard of honor by the Special Guard of the BSF. He also interacted with the BSF personnel and encouraged them. Addressing the officers, the Vice President said that he felt proud to meet the soldiers of the Border Security Force, known as the first line of defense of the country. The heat wave in India is to linger and the monsoon has stalled. The Met Department has issued an orange alert for Delhi for 2 to 3 days. Severe heat wave conditions are prevailing in the northern regions of Uttar Pradesh, Bihar and Jharkhand. The monsoon has arrived in North India, but due to which there has been rainfall in sub-Himalayan regions, West Bengal and Sikkim. But heavy rain is also expected in the northeast regions such as Assam and Meghalaya.
We expect red alert to continue for the next 4 to 5 days. And for Punjab and Haryana, if we see, we are not seeing such high temperatures over this region, but we are also seeing the heat wave conditions associated with it. We are giving orange alert for next 2 to 3 days, and afterwards we will be going for the yellow alert. For Delhi particular, we are giving orange alert for 2 days and thereafter a reduction. When we are talking of northwest India, currently heat wave conditions are prevailing. We have reports of severe heat wave recorded over stations in East and West Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, Jharkhand, western parts of Gangetic West Bengal. This situation is likely to prevail today also.
Well, the search operation launched in Jammu and Kashmir to track down and neutralize terrorists after the June 9 attack on a bus carrying pilgrims entered the 6th day on Friday. Terrorists struck at 4 places in Riyasi, Kathua and Doda districts over the past few days, killing 9 pilgrims and a CRPF Jawan and leaving 7 security personnel and several others injured. 2 suspected Pakistani terrorists were also killed in an encounter with security forces in Kathua, and a large quantity of arms and ammunition were recovered from them. Meanwhile, the search operation is underway in Riyasi as well as adjoining Rajouri district in view of intelligence inputs about a possible terror threat. To further enhance maritime security, India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh is visiting Visakhapatnam. On his visit, the Defence Minister will review the preparedness of India's Naval Eastern Fleet. The Eastern Fleet is a naval fleet of the Indian Navy, and it is known as the sword arm of the Eastern Naval Command and is called the Sunrise Fleet. It's headquartered at Visakhapatnam, Andhra Pradesh, on the east coast of India. And now let's get you some updates on International Yoga Day, which will be celebrated on the 21st of June. And we're going once again across to Italy, and this is the meeting that is coming in, visuals that are coming in from Italy of Prime Minister Narendra Modi meeting with the Ukrainian President Zelenskyy on the sidelines of the G7 summit. Like this meeting has just taken place. The Prime Minister had earlier met with the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the French President Emmanuel Macron. He is scheduled to take part in the G7 outreach partners meeting that will take place in a short while. Zelenskyy has also been invited to the G7, and in fact, one of the key events that had taken place earlier in the day was a $50 billion loan that has been given to Ukraine, and also a pledge for 10 years to support Ukraine in developing its defense capabilities by the United States. Of course, India has been keen that conflict is brought to an end, and Prime Minister had said it very famously that this is not the era of war, and even Zelenskyy had agreed with Prime Minister Narendra Modi that the views that if there is a country that can, intervene and speak to both sides, it could be India. So we'll get you more about this meeting and what transpired at it in our subsequent bulletins. But that's all we have in this edition of DD India News Hour. Let's know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly known as Twitter, and Instagram. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Mark Lynn from all of us here in Delhi. Thanks very much for watching DD India News Hour. Namaskar.